since we have the screen shared, it only makes sense to share this. We all get desperate and feel that we can never get anything done. And we see our ulama, mashallah, they were able to get so much done. Walillah alhamd wal minna. But did they try to get things done and weren't ever able to complete it, يعني, as they wanted? The answer is yes, and this is a beautiful example. So I finally got a hold, I literally just got it an hour ago. This is the notes of Al-Imam Al-Isnawi in his own handwriting that fallen into the hands of Imam Al-Suyuti, and the work was never completed. Okay, what he meant to do by this is to make a full encyclopedia. Like you see the segment on wudu, the booklet on wudu that I put together, he meant to do something similar to that, but for everything, yani based off of Rawdat al-Talibin. Look at the scribbles there at the bottom, right? Marking things off. Pretty amazing. Look at that. He wrote stuff, crossed it out, tried to rewrite stuff again. These are, I have a complete book, 150 slides of one of Imam al-Isnawi's private notebooks in trying to put like an encyclopedia thing together. And he wrote things, he scribbled on them, didn't like how he wrote it, drew a line across, tried to write it again, and so on. Don't feel depressed. Do not feel, subhanallah. Oh, he's a major scholar. A major scholar. He is a, yani, he's a, when it comes to the Shafi'i school, this is as Shafi'i as you can get. Look at that. When we write our notes and we're doing our studies, and we're like, oh no, this is horrible, I wrote a whole paragraph I don't like. Yeah, but you're not alone. These types of things, how do we study them? Yeah, we do. They're beautiful. Like, look right here, he's well, this is in the middle of another mas'ala, so let me switch it to, okay, here we go. Look at this. If he says, according to Imam al-Mutawalli, if the condition is we just rinse off a knife after we use it, meaning, right, then after we use it in like things that's blood and we rinse it off, we could go ahead and utilize it in things that are wet, like cutting a tomato, right? Like we would use it in things that are dry. So if it were to come into contact with something filthy that cannot be removed by water, right? Then we're going to have to treat this filth like some sort of oily substance. Okay, so just rinsing off will not be enough according to the Sah, as stated by Al-Mahamili and Al-Baghawi. Okay, and removing of najasa that was not done out of sinning, that's spreading around, because you're not allowed to spread, would not be something that you immediately need to do, but rather when you get up for prayer. But it's still sunnah to do it, like Mutawalli said and others. And he's going into the next one. Yeah, the only problem is that they were not great in maintaining punctuation. Nam, and we have read it in other classes, and we will be reading the segment for this class as well, inshallah ta'ala. Let me grab my book Al-Ghaya, let's get to class, and we'll keep touring manuscripts for another time, inshallah ta'ala. Now, I only mentioned that because I literally got this manuscript an hour ago. Walillahi alhamdu wal minna. No one has that manuscript anywhere in the world, except for what you see right there before your own eyes. And no one will probably even try to get a hold of it because, as you can see, it's notes. It's not a complete book. And getting a hold of manuscripts is very difficult. And a lot of times it involves either knowing a lot of people or money. Didn't we say we're going to use, because I don't like that copyright there. I think we said we're going to use a shamila. So let me bring a shamila into this, inshallah. غاية الوصول. Let's try to get right into work because we are already late. No, move forward. Here we go. We're speaking about the rukhas now. He says, والحكم أي الشرعي إذ الكلام فيه. When you're taking notes in your book, remember this. He's saying والحكم أي الشرعي. Why did he say that it's shar'i? Aside from that, it's his own book that he's explaining, is that we're only speaking about al-hukm al-shar'i in this segment, right? So adding these types of notes like a shar'i, even though it might seem obvious to you when you're first looking at it, it might just be obvious for you, not necessarily obvious for the next person or someone that you're teaching, right? Or for you later on when you're simply looking through it. So adding these types of notes in are very important. قال إن تغير من حيث تعلقه من صعوبة له على المكلف, if the hardship has varied upon the mukallaf, إلى سهولة, so the hukm said do 10 of something مثلا, but now all of a sudden it's saying no, you can do 5 of it. Okay, that went from صعوبة, hardship, to سهولة, ease. كأن تغير من حرمة شيء إلى حله, like something going from haram to halal. تمام. لعذر مع قيام السبب للحكم الأصلي, for an excuse, that's an عذر, but the عذر is present even though the original حكم is also present. الحكم الأصلي, it's still there. Not only that, the norms that you would have needed to perform that original hukm are actually still there. And that's what he means by qiyam as-sabab. Meaning, say, that, we'll say fasting Ramadan, right? You must fast Ramadan. You have to. And this is the case for every baligh, of age, aqil, sane, right? Muslim, right? Without any normal, natural things that would stop him, like, or her, like hayd. Well, we'll say, I'm traveling, I'm baligh, I'm aqil, I'm Muslim, right? And I'm a male, so I don't have an issue of hayd, walillah alhamdu wal minna. With this new gender chaos in the West, you never know what you'll hear tomorrow, right? But normally, right, this would be the case. So even though I'm a traveler, look at this. None of the conditions actually changed. So the sabab, right, a sabab al-asli is there. So the hukm al-asli is there. But there's a new addition to the mas'ala, and that is an excuse, a udhr, right? What is this udhr? right? This udhr here in this example we utilized is safar, is travel. Keep in mind that this is an additional component to the actual scenario. It's not part of the normal scenario. As a matter of fact, all the factors of the original scenario are there as is. None of them have actually changed in any way. He says, المتخلف عنه لعذر. But because this udhr was introduced, now you have a right to not obey the original hukm. فَرُخْصَةٌ. This scenario here would be considered what? A rukhsah. And all of rukhas normally, they come like this. They're additional components to the actual scenarios, meaning the hukm, the reasons, the do, the person is supposed to do it. Everything is usually the same. قال أي فالحكم السهل المذكور يسمى رخصة. In the example that we were talking about, then me not fasting, right, would be considered what? A رخصة. وهي بإسكان الخاء رخصة أكثر من ضمها رخصة. No one uses that normally, even though linguistically it might be valid. And bear in mind, like we say غسل جمعة, right? Linguistically, غسل is correct, not غسل. As a matter of fact, غسل might be weak linguistically. It is? Yeah. If you're using it by itself. If you're using it as saying غسل الجمعة, you won't say غسل الجمعة, you'll say غسل الجمعة, because that's إضافة. Just linguistically, the proper thing is, don't say غسل, but to say the section of غسل. Linguistically. But linguistically, no one speaks that way. تمام؟ قال لغة أي أنها يعني the word رخصة in لغة, it means سهولة. Of course, it doesn't mean like that عرفا today, right? When I say رخصة, it doesn't mean ease. When I get my رخصة for driving, it's not to make my driving ease or easier. If only, DMV is probably the only thing by human consensus as something that should be down under, and I don't mean Australia, right? In the Middle East, I didn't have to suffer with that a whole lot. My passport always worked enough for me. Have you had to go to the DMV, Nicholas? I think I went once with a friend, but that was pretty much it in Egypt. In America, it's still pretty rough. Unless you're in the countryside like I am, we have a drive-through. They don't even want you in. The DMV. Oh, afwan. Where you go to get your driver's license. We call it DMV. Even though in most of the states in America, it's not called the DMV. I think it's only in New York and New Jersey, but it just became nationwide, the DMV. طيب. He says, واجبة ومندوبة ومباحة. سبحان الله. ومباحة وخلاف الأولى. هذه الصفات اللازمة بيان لأقسام الرخصة الممثل لها على هذا الترتيب بقولي. Now, sometimes the rukhsa might be wajib, might be mandub, might be mubah, and might be khilaf al-awla. Okay? Why? It just depends on the scenario itself. And he's going to give us some of that. So he says, كأكل ميتة كلام جميل لمضطر. That might be what? Be wajib. Because a mayta is an animal not slaughtered according to the Sharia. A muttar is a person that is in need, necessity. Tamam? So eating it, if it's a life or death situation, they're going to have to do what? they're going to go ahead and eat it. He says, وقصر من مسافر بقيد زدته بقولي بشرطه. نعم. He means, يعني he said وقصر بشرطه. Right, yeah. وقصر بشرطه. That's what he said in the actual text. Those two words, the first one and the last word. He said, I added this in. قال بأن كره القصر أو شك في جوازه. نعم, if a person does not want to do qasr, meaning they despise the idea, they don't like doing it, they don't like following this rule or this idea, they don't think it's even allowed. Here you'll see a lot of the ulama and the fuqaha, they'll come and say what? They have to go and do qasr because they're doubting the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. أو كان سفره يبلغ 3 مراحل فأكثر ولم يختلف في جواز قصره كما هو معلوم من محله. A travel that's very very far, like 3 مراحل. 3 مراحل, يعني you're talking about somewhere around يعني 75 miles, you know. No one differed that, yeah, once you're crossing يعني 70, 75, 100 miles, no, خلاص يعني القصر, no one ever doubted that point. No matter the speed of travel, that's not something looked at when it comes to this matter. He says, وسلم وهو بيع موصوف في الذمة بلفظ سلم. This is not necessarily what? A wajib rukhsa, but it's an allowed rukhsa. You can go ahead and do it. تمام. قال وفطر مسافر في زمن صوم واجب أصالة أو بنذر أو قضاء ما فات بلا تعد. كلام جميل. أو قضاء ما فات بلا تعد. All of these things, what? Have more ease to it. قال لا يضره الصوم فإن ضره فالفطر أولى. You're allowed. He says والمعنى أن الرخصة كحل المذكورات من وجوب وندب وإباحة وخلاف أولى وحكمها الأصلي الحرمة. The original حكم in some of these matters might be what? That it's haram. He gives examples of some of the things that he mentioned. Like what? Like أكل الميتة. That's haram, right? Why? Because we consider it to be khabith. Because there's najasa involved in it, right? ودخول وقتي الصلاة والصوم في القصر والفطر. You were supposed to pray when the time of prayer has entered. You were supposed to fast when the time of fast is entered, right? You were supposed to do it completely, not shorten your prayer. But because of these a'dhar, the state varied, the state changed. Why? Because the عذر لأنه سبب لوجوب الصلاة تامة والصوم, meaning the وقت. The time was the cause for these things to be requested and expected of you. But because of their udhr, they weren't. He says, وَالْغَرَرُ فِي السَّلَمِ. Salam means, Nicholas, I'm going to sell you my phone. I want $500. It's an iPhone. What do I have? Oh, I have the XR. All the description is description you know for the XR. I don't have the phone with me. I'll bring it to you tomorrow. but pay me now. Can you do that? Yes, you can. It's called salam. Salam is allowed, even though they consider salam to be what? A rukhsa. Why is it considered as a rukhsa? Because if I was planning on selling my phone on a regular basis, I'd have it with me. Or if I was planning on selling my phone in this setting, I would have had it with me. Something changed, made me change my mind. So now I want to sell it, but I don't have it on me. The regular rules of selling will tell me I can't sell it. Tamam? But we're going to allow it utilizing salam. Why is there this issue with salam? Because the product is not there. I might say it's an XR, but could I have done something to the motherboard? Definitely, right? Could it be used so badly that it's almost worn out? Of course. Of course. So there's all these different possibilities, but the Sharia allowed it nevertheless to make things easier. قال والغرر في السلم وهي قائمة حال الحل وأعذار الحل الاضطرار ومشقة السفر والحاجة إلى ثمن الغلات قبل إدراكها. نعم. You go, you're in a certain thing, or you know it's time for something, and you see the person to buy from them. You want to process that, right? You want to get that opportunity. You want to be competitive in your purchasing and things, right? Well, then having that opportunity is important. And here the Sharia is giving you that opportunity. قال وسهولة الوجوب في أكل الميتة لموافقته غرض النفس في بقائها وقيل إنه عزيمة لصعوبته. They differed on basically trying to determine, well, why am I allowing, right, a person to eat the mayta? They said, well, realistically, this will go back to the idea of preserving life, which is a good argument. But some said, no, that's not why it's there. Then why is it there? They said, it's because doing what you're supposed to do is not possible. So, since you cannot do, or there's hardship in doing what you're supposed to do to preserve your life, it's that hardship that allowed you to eat that, not the preservation of life. There's a small khilaf between usulis. When you say preservation of life, to what extent does that even mean? Because, for example, if an animal is dying, if a person is dying, can we do assisted suicide? Can we put the animal down to rest them? In the Shafi'i madhab, we say no. In other madhab, they say yes, of course. Not maybe on the assisted suicide thing, that thing's a little bit problematic. But putting down your horse or your dog is something common in other madhab. It's common around the world. We could probably speak to any person anywhere in the world at any point of history, and your horse is dying. What do? You put the horse down, right? The Shafi'is, however, they say no. No, then what does a person need to do? Give them medicine. Help them get better. No. We don't do that. We end their suffering by giving them medicine. We don't put them down. Okay? Remember, not that long ago, there was this big debate. A Shafi'i scholar, and we think he did it by accident. because we know for a fact that the Shafi'i school said we don't do that. We don't end the suffering. Well, we end the suffering by giving them medicine. So giving them morphine, for example, for the pain, yes, that would be a good thing to do. Okay. But putting them out of their misery altogether, no, we don't have the right to do that. And the Shafi'is all agreed to this. And yeah, so a Shafi'i scholar, I think about like a year ago, 2 years ago, he made a big mistake and he said, you can. He said, it's in the Tuhfa. Which of course made people like, come on, man. Come on, there's like a whole 5 pages of explaining why you can't in the Tuhfa. We know this. And it was so frustrating. And it got into like these arguments, and we're like, why are we even arguing about this? We know this. Other schools, however, say, well, no, I mean, the mercy, ending the suffering, ending that would be just to, again, not with the assisted suicide, but like putting an animal down. It's very common, as I'm saying, anywhere in the world. That's why I said any culture, any point in history, you'll see that this is a very common understanding. But the Shafi'is have a problem with it. Why do we have a problem with it? Life is not ours. This body is not ours. We are told to preserve life. Take the issue we were talking about not that long ago about the issue of the Majus. People that there's a difference, are they from Ahlul Kitab or not? Although I lean to a certain extent that almost all previous nations are from a form of a kitab that they received, because the similarities are just too much. They're just too much. I mean, even things like Odin, Thor, and Loki. What's Loki? He's not an Asgardian, right? He's from another race that the stories shift exactly what they are, right? Right. Taken as a baby. Well, we have Israeliyat that many scholars of Islam accepted as fact, while some might say, okay, wait a minute, we need to review that a little bit more, that state that when the angels were fighting some of the jinn, they found Iblis as a baby and then they took him with him to heaven. But if we will cross-reference that story with the story of Loki and the Asgardians, it's almost identical. Okay, now, Allahu A'lam, I don't know. But what if we were to argue and say the Asgardians, again, modern day translations are horrible. I mean, they still translate for the ancient Egyptians that some of these figures were gods, and the text doesn't even say gods. That's their assumption. Yes, they were special people, but none of the text, none of the hieroglyphs actually say gods, by the way. So FYI about that. Karim Jamil. And Egyptians, if you go speak to Egyptians, they're like, yeah, no one ever thought that maybe Ra was considered a god, but yeah, except for a few random pharaohs that considered themselves gods, that was pretty much it. And that was uncommon for them. So, aside from the translation issues and the problems that are with the translations and translations of translations of translations, I mean, I have the translation of Minhaj al-Talibin into English that was made from a French translation, and you read the English, I have no idea what book he's talking about. Even though I know the book, right? So we take all of these discrepancies and problems into consideration. Couldn't we just say that that's the Asgardians are the stories of the angels and the issues that were going on with the jinn, and it got doctored later on, as tends to happen? I mean, look at chaos and the sky god. I mean, realistically, there was never gods. It was just the first things that Allah created in the beginning of creation, right? Referred to as deities, titans, or what have you, right? Primordial deities, but they never were actually deities. Wouldn't one here argue or could argue that if I was to cross-reference a lot of these stories with the basic accepted stories of Islam, I could, taking certain titles out of the mix, I could actually cross-reference a lot of these things. I could even argue or get to a point where saying that these multiple gods were never gods to begin with. These were the angels, and for some reason, instead of a battle between jinn and angels, becomes titans and Olympians, right? Something to that effect. I'm not saying that necessarily is the case, right? Or could we say that the shaitan came and he played with things like we know the story with the mother and holding a child is actually Nimrod. It actually comes from the story of Nimrod, and then somehow it kind of seeped into other traditions and eventually even got into Christianity itself. And it was about, it was Nimrod's mother who was pregnant with Nimrod's child. It's a long story, but I'm trying to get as one might come to the argument, understanding that all previous nations that follow some sort of systematic religion did start out at a true kitab, and we know that every nation received a prophet or messenger. So taking that into consideration, and all of those possibilities, the Shafi'is actually based the judgment here. You know what they said? We need to preserve blood. We don't know if the Majus have a book or not. We'll take jizya from them regardless. And they've done this several times in history, even though we don't necessarily understand or agree or say for a fact that nation X is the people of a book, but we took jizya anyway. Why? To stop bloodshed. So we looked at it from the aspect of stopping bloodshed and all of these random other possibilities that we cannot show certainty for, all in an effort to get to one point and one point only, and that is to stop any bloodshed. Because Shafi'is hold life at a very, very high position. Tamam? Right. See, we went from giving horses some mercy to studying or looking into the Norse, the Greeks, the Egyptians, and some other nations. That's the beauty of fiqh. Anyway, he says, وَمِنَ الرُّخَصِ الْمُبَاحَةِ. Some of the rukhas that we know that are mubah. إباحة ترك الجماعة في الصلاة لمرض أو نحوه. Not going to Salat al-Jama'ah because you are ill, for example. وحكمه الأصلي الكراهة. Even though the original rule of not going to Jama'ah is that it is what? It is makruh to not go to Jama'ah, as opposed to other madhab it might be haram. For ours it's not, it's makruh. There is a scenario that it might be haram if you are, by you not going, no one in that area actually holds a Jama'ah, then that changes everything. Tamam. He says, وسببها قائم حال الإباحة وهو الانفراد فيما يطلب فيه الاجتماع من شعائر الإسلام, because it's from the sha'air of Islam. He says, وقد بينت في الحاشية, meaning his commentary on Al-Imam Al-Mahalli's sharh of Jam' Al-Jawami'. That's his main book. So this book is a summary of what he did there, basically. He says, وقد بينت في الحاشية كمية أقسام الرخص الحاصلة بالانتقال من حكم إلى آخر. كمية means the amount. That's a purely Egyptian word. No one normally uses that. They'll just, in Egyptian lingo will be like, أنا شفت كمية الحكايات اللي هنا دي لقيتها كتير قوي. Which means the amount of. So he's saying, I mentioned the amount of the types of rukhas that we have that will switch a hukm from one hukm to another. That'll be something that you want to go back to and get that list and take it into your notes. وقضية ما ذكر أن الرخصة لا تكون محرمة ولا مكروهة وهو كما قال العراقي ظاهر خبر إن الله يحب أن تؤتى رخصه, saying that the reality is that a rukhsa is never really looked at as makruh or haram. Why? He's saying, well, like Imam al-Iraqi said, and that's al-Wali al-Iraqi, the son of Zainuddin al-Iraqi. Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he said, after my teacher Zainuddin al-Iraqi passed, his class of Minhaj was, and all of his classes really were given to his son, Walid al-Iraqi. But Wali had never spoken before. Like, he always sat silent in his father's classes. Hafidh ibn Hajar says, we were so worried that the whole class and the whole system was just going to go away and we're never going to have it again. In his first class, that he was going to teach Minhaj al-Talibin. So we were like, all right, let's go and see how this is going to work out. And he was like, we felt like it's going to be horrible. He says, until that sheikh opened his mouth. And then we realized our sheikh didn't die. His knowledge went right into his son, literally. Well, then why was his son silent this whole time? Yeah, it was out of respect to his father. Why would he speak while his father's there? And truly, turned out to be a great imam in hadith, in fiqh, in usul. That was al-Waliuddin al-Iraqi, rahimahullah ta'ala, imam. He said, Waliuddin al-Iraqi, when he mentioned this, he said, they'll never be, rukhas will never be looked at as haram or makruh due to the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's sahih, where the Prophet sallallahu said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves for his rukhas to be fulfilled. If he gave you a rukhsa, use it. He did it for you out of love for you, making things easier for you. They'll never be looked at as something haram or something wrong, right, or something makruh. He says, وَمَا قِيلَ مِنْ أَنَّهَا تَكُونُ كَذَلِكَ حيث قيل إن الاستنجاء بذهب أو فضة يجزئ مع أنه حرام وإن القصر لدون 3 مراحل جائز مع أنه مكروه كما قيل الماوردي. Saying, some argued and said, well, wait a minute. Istinja with wiping is allowed, right? Right. But utilizing gold and silver, is that allowed? Well, it's accepted, but I mean, it's haram because you're not supposed to use gold and silver. The same thing when it comes to breaking your salat down for a trip that's less than 3 marahil. Well, it's allowed, obviously, because all you need is 2 marahil, not 3. But there's khilaf on it. And some said it's makruh, kalam jameel, as al-Imam al-Mawardi mentioned. He didn't mention as if it was his opinion. He told us that it was an opinion that some people had. He said, أُجِيبَ عَنْ أَوَّلِهِمَا, meaning that they responded to these objections by saying that the istinja with gold and silver is allowed according to the mu'tamad of the madhab, unless it was stamped, and usually when you stamp, they'll usually write things like, Inna Allaha ma'as sadiqeen, right? Or sabirin on it and things like that. That would make it more haram. But just gold and silver in general, it is jaiz, but this is not a rukhsa. Wiping is a rukhsa. Wiping with gold and silver is not a rukhsa. And its issue is not, not wiping with gold and silver is not because it's gold and silver, it's because we don't use gold and silver. You're not supposed to be using gold and silver unless men can use silver as rings and women can use gold and silver as jewelry. But aside from that, that's it. So they say it's haram to wipe with gold and silver, not because wiping with them is haram, but because utilizing gold and silver in general is haram, right? So objecting here and saying, well, this is a rukhsa. No, wiping is a rukhsa, not wiping with gold and silver. He said, as for the second one, the one that Imam al-Mawardi mentioned, when it comes to it's makruh doing the rukhas between 2 and 3 marahil, right? He's saying that even if the karaha here, the dislikefulness that is connected, right, to this matter, it's they never said it was shadidat al karaha, but rather they said khilaf al awla, because once you pass 3 marahil, aside from all the issues of conversion, everyone agrees after 3 marahil, that's it, خلاص, there's no khilaf on the distance and whatnot. He says, وَلَكَ أَن تَقُولَ الرُّخْصَةُ إِنَّمَا لَمْ تُوصَفْ بِالْحُرْمَةِ لِصُعُوبَتِهَا مُطْلَقًا وهذا منتف في الكراهة كخلاف الأولى لأنهما سهلان بالنسبة إلى الحرمة. He said, one might argue and say that the rukhsa is not called haram because it only comes into effect when something is a burden, when there is hardship of something upon you. Okay? But if there's no hardship, then it's not called a rukhsa, and therefore it can fall right back into a hurma if it was haram with ease. Kalam Jamil. Here we'll stop bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. I know we went off script in our classes today, inshallah ta'ala. Next week we won't do that bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So here we'll stop. وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله تعالى لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. And we'll pick up from Al-Azima inshaAllah ta'ala. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.